My niece thinks holding grudges is more important than helping her family. My son is going through a rough patch financially. He has a wife and kids, bills piling up, and they're barely holding on. As his father, I've helped as much as I can, but I thought reaching out to family would be the smart move. After all, family helps family. That's how it should be now. My niece has turned into some successful businesswoman. She runs around boutique and even has multiple stores. She posts all over social media about our travels for expensive clothes, her independence. So naturally, I figured she'd want to step up and help her cousin, the man who's basically her brother in all but name. But when I called her, she flat out rejected me. No hesitation, no sympathy. She immediately went into this long rant about how we treated her years ago. She dragged up the fact that her father, my brother, died of complications from diabetes, and how after that we took everything from her, meaning the house and his belongings. She made it sound like we stole from her, but the truth is we were the ones who had to step up and handle things when she was too young to understand. She never had it easy. Her mother died during childbirth, so she was left with only her father, and when he passed we did what was necessary for the family. But apparently she's been holding on the bitterness all these years. She called us backstabbers and said we left her with nothing but scars. I told her that's all in the past. She's an adult now running a thriving business. Why keep holding a grudge? Why not use compassion instead of resentment? I even reminded her that this wasn't about me. This was about my son, her cousin, and his kids who are her blood relatives. Her own niece and nephew need help, and she has more than enough to give. But she just dug in further. She said it's not her responsibility to care for spoiled brats, and the people who betrayed her spoiled. My son is a hard-working man who just hit some bad luck. How dare she insults her own cousin like that? I told her she was letting pride get in the way of what family should be about. She laughed and said her business or stores and her life or hers alone, and that nobody who treated her like trash years ago deserves a dime from her. The audacity, family comes first always. That's how it was raised, and that's what I taught my children. I haven't tried asking other relatives to talk some sense into her, to intervene and remind her of her roots. But she refuses to listen. She acts like because she's self-made she doesn't owe anyone anything. That's not how family works. She doesn't get to rewrite history just because she's suddenly rolling in money and go. Honestly, maybe it's time she's reminded that blood ties are stronger than grudges, and that no amount of boutiques or stores will change the fact that she's family. When your cousin's kids are struggling, you step up. Simple as that. Update 1. I wasn't going to let this go. I knew my niece would just brush me off over the phone, so I decided to shop at her office in person. She's got this fancy setup now. A whole boutique headquarters with her name on the wall, employees running around like she's some queen. I walked right in until the receptionist. I needed to see her. When she tried to brush me off, I raised my voice and said I was her uncle, and this was a family matter that got me in the door. And when I finally stood in front of her, I laid it all out. I told her about my son, her cousin, how he and his kids are barely surviving right now. I told her that no matter what happened in the past, blood comes first. I expected her to soften, but instead she folded her arms and looked at me like I was a stranger. So I raised my voice. I reminded her about her father, how he wasted away from diabetes, or we were the ones left to deal with everything. I reminded her about her mother, who died giving birth to her, leaving her with nothing but us to guide her. Do you think your parents would be proud of this? I said loud enough that I know people in the hall heard me. Do you think they would smoke mile from heaven watching you abandon your own flesh and blood while you sit your fancy office pretending you're above family? Her employees stopped what they were doing. A couple picked out from behind their desks, and I could see the shock on their faces. She hissed at me to lower my voice. But I wasn't about to let her shaming into silence. I told her straight, your father was my brother. He believed in family above everything. He would have wanted you to help your cousin and his children. He would have been devastated to see you acting like money matters more than blood. And what did she say? She told me not to weaponize her parents against her. She said her father would be ashamed of us, not her, that we took everything from her when he died, that we backstabbed her, that we left her with nothing. She spat those words like venom in front of everyone. I told her she was living in the past, that grudges don't feed hungry mouths, that her niece and nephew, her father's own grandchildren and spirit, are the ones suffering because she's too stubborn to move forward. But she just stood there calm and cold while I fought for her to see reason. When I left, people were still staring. Let them stare. I don't care if they think I was dramatic. I spoke the truth. If her parents were alive, they'd be on my side, and one day she'll realize how wrong she was for slamming the door on family when we needed her most. Update 2. I've reached my breaking point with the situation. The sheer gall of my niece refusing to help her own blood is beyond comprehension. I've tried to be patient, I've tried reasoning, but enough is enough. Every time I think about her father, my own brother, who died too young from diabetes, and her mother, who gave her life in childbirth, it makes me sick to my stomach. Those two would be ashamed to see the way their daughter has turned her back on her family. Now we picked up the pieces when she was left alone, and this is how she repays us: by acting like we're strangers, by pretending she owes us nothing. I decided that if she wasn't going to listen to me, then maybe she'd listen to the family as a whole. I started reaching out, telling people what happened, explaining how desperate my son and his kids are, and how cold she's been. Some agreed with me right away. Others told me I was overreacting, that I should just let it go before it made things worse. But I refuse to hit my son's children. Her own niece and nephew are suffering, and I will not sit idle while they're at a woman with more stores and she can count, and more money than you'll ever need, chooses to ignore them. So yes, I pushed harder. Relatives and friends began showing up at her stores, confronting her staff, demanding answers. They as loudly how their boss could abandon her niece and nephew while she started around calling herself a self-made success. Customers overheard, and I could tell it made an impact. For employees look shaken. That was good. Maybe she'd finally realized she is an untouchable. Still, it didn't feel like enough. That's when I decided to take things online. At first, the bad reviews came naturally from people who supported me. But when I saw she wasn't reacting, I took matters into my own hands. I pay people to leave more one-star reviews criticizing her attitude, her so-called values, and how she treats family. I know some people will call petty, but I don't care. She built her world on business, then businesses were a hitter. I even went further. I posted pictures of my grandkids, her niece and nephew, wearing their torn clothes, looking as pitiful as you could imagine. I shared it online with the story of how they're rich and refuses to lift a finger to help them. I knew people would feel sympathy, and they did. The comments poured in, shaming her, asking how someone with boutiques and money to burn could turn her back on children in need. I thought surely that would get her to open her eyes. But still she ignores me. No replies to my messages, no calls back, nothing but cold silence. I told her point blank, if you had just helped your cousin like family supposed to, none of this would be happening. All of this ends the moment you choose family over pride. But she doesn't care. Her heart is ice. So I've escalated. I hired a lawyer. People might call me extreme, but I don't think so. The truth is, without the sacrifices we made after her father died, she would never have had the chance to succeed. She grew up under our roof with our support, and we gave her the foundation she built her business on. Now she wants to pretend she's self-made. No, half of it belongs to us. That's the law. Family and that's the law. I'll be pushing, and court let her laugh now, let her ignore me all she wants. But one day soon she'll have to face the truth. You don't spit on family and walk away. You don't turn your back on blood. And if she won't remember that herself, then I'll remind her by any means necessary. Update 3. I thought the tide had finally turned in my favor after weeks of silence. My niece finally called me. Her voice was sweet, polite, almost too nice. She said she'd like to meet us at home and talk things over properly. I took that as a victory. I thought she was finally coming to her senses, finally realizing that family comes first. I called my son, his wife, and the kids. I told him it was time to celebrate because help was on the way. A few relatives who had been backing me showed up too. In the mood in the house was like a little party before the main event. Then she walked in black business dress, high heels clicking on the floor. I sharp enough to cut through stone, and that smile it unsettled everyone immediately. My grandkids, who had been excited at first, actually stepped back the moment she kneeled down and said a load of them. Even my son's wife looked uncomfortable. I straightened my shoulders, determined not to let her presence intimidate me. This was still my home. I got right to the point. I told her we'd been waiting and asked where the money was. She just smiled calmly and said, I didn't bring any money. I never will give you a single dime. My blood boiled. I reminded her that this wasn't about me. It was about her cousin and her niece and nephew. I said the money was for them, for family. But then she turned to my son, her cousin, and said, and how's your gambling habit helping your kids? Room went dead silent. My son whipped his head toward me. Confused. What gambling habit? He asked. She just smart and told him he better tell truth before it's too late. Some of the relatives muttered angrily, saying she had no right to stir things up. Wasn't going to let her spin this. I snapped back, warning her again. If she didn't help, things would get worse for her. That's when she leaned back in her chair, her voice steady as ice. Any minute now the doorbell will ring. Before anyone could scoff, the chime rang through the house. One of the relatives went to the door and called out my name. A man stepped in, a process server. He walked straight up to me, handed me an envelope, and said flatly, "You've been served." My hands shook his. I tore it open. My heart dropped. A lawsuit, uttering threats, blackmail, child exploitation, slander, and defamation, property damage, and more. My face went pale as I read each word. Before I could even sputter a response, the process server began calling out other names in the room. My relatives, the very key ones who had shown up to support me, were each handed their own legal notices. I shouted, demanding to know what the hell this was. She stood calmly, adjusting her dress, and said, "This is just my response to your actions and everyone else's. And by the way, I'll also be coming back for the money you took from me when my father died." With that, she smiled again, turned, and walked out the door. Rage surged through me. I nearly lunged to grab her, but a couple of relatives stepped in, stopping me. They pointed to the window and whispered urgently. Outside, I could see people standing by, witnesses. In the process server inside still had a body camera recording every move. The room emptied after that. The celebration had turned into devastation. My son sat there in shock, his wife clutching the kids, and the rest of the family to stand to speak. No one knew what to say. No one knew what would happen next. And for the first time, I did neither update, for it's been near early a week since my niece showed up at our door, and the fallout hasn't stopped. If anything, it's gotten worse. At first, I kept telling myself it was all smoke and mirrors, that her lawsuit was a bluff to scare us and a backing down, but I couldn't shake the unease in my gut, so I brought the documents to my lawyer. The moment he skimmed through them, I saw his face change, his tone drop. "This is all legitimate," he said. "Every single accusation, uttering threats, blackmail, child exploitation, slander, defamation, property damage. It's all there in black and white. And the way it's written, she's not just coming after me. She's coming after everyone who stood with me. Now the relatives who once had my back or running scared the same people who marched into her stores, shouted at her staff, and wrote those reviews are now distancing themselves one by one. They've turned on me. Someone even answer my calls anymore. A few had the nerve to message her directly begging for forgiveness, pretending they had no idea what was going on. Hypocrites, traitors, they were happy to ride the wave when it was convenient, but now that the tide turned, they're cowards hiding in the shadows. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, her company released a public statement. Just a few paragraphs, but it was enough to ignite a storm. It said plainly that our business was being targeted by her uncle, me, the very same man who stole her inheritance after her father died and left destitute as a child, and now years later I was trying to extort money with the help of other family members. Attached were screenshots of my tax mess. Ages, my own words displayed for the world to see. If you had just helped, none of this would be happening. Things will only get worse for you. I could see strangers online dissecting them, calling me a monster, a manipulator. And then the photos, the pictures I posted of my grandchildren, and torn close faces, blurred, but unmistakably children. Right next to them, another set of photos, the same kids from just days before, smiling and perfectly fine brand new outfits, proof that I had staged the whole thing. The comments were vicious, hundreds of strangers condemning me overnight. The narrative flipped, and now I'm branded a liar and an exploiter of my own family. The atmosphere in my house has shifted. My son, who was the reason I did all this, is furious. He insists he never wanted this to spiral out of control. He keeps repeating that all he needed was help, just a little money to get back on his feet, and that he would have paid her back. Now he's facing the very real possibility of being sued alongside me. His wife's voice trembled when she finally asked, "What do we do now?" The fear in her eyes was something I've never seen before. I tried to stay in control. I tried to show strength. I picked up the phone and called my niece, demanding that she drop the lawsuit. I told her she was tearing the family apart, that this was her last chance to end it before things went too far. She didn't even take me seriously. She laughed, that same cold, confident laugh she gave me when she stood in my living room. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. Actions have consequences. She told me she'd be reclaiming what was rightfully hers, her inheritance that included the engagement ring my daughter-in-law wears, the very ring that belonged to her late mother, and the house we live in now. She said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it felt less like a threat and more like a promise. I felt fear clawing at my chest, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't let her hear it in my voice. I told her there was still time to fix this, still time to walk it back before the damage became permanent. She only laughed again, longer this time, and then hung up. Now I can't sleep. I pace the house at night, staring at the walls, wondering if there'll even be hours much longer. My son refuses to look me in the eye. My wife won't speak above a whisper. The relatives who once cheered me on are pretending they never knew me. And outside, I can almost feel the stares from neighbors who bred statement, who seen the pictures for the first time. I'm starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, I don't have control anymore. Update 5. It's been a couple more weeks since all of this began, and I feel like I'm slowly drowning every day. It feels like the walls are closing and tighter. I can't escape the weight of what's happening, no matter how much I try to convince myself that I can still fix it. Some of the relatives who had been grumbling quietly finally snapped out of anger and frustration. They decided to retaliate against my niece. They went at night and vandalized one of our stores, throwing rocks through the glass, thinking it would send a message in that no one would know was them. But of course there were cameras. Within a few days the police showed up at their homes. They were arrested, And now they're sitting in jail cells. When word spread, the rest of the family was horrified. Nobody's cheering anymore. Nobody is talking about teaching her a lesson or reminding her that family comes first. They're all terrified. I've heard whispers that many relatives have tried to reach out to her since then. Some, she answers, but only to laugh at them. Other times, she ignores them completely. It's like she's dangling the silence over their heads, reminding them she's in control. Now, every unanswered call just twists the knife deeper. As for the court case, it's been moved around by her lawyer, dates rescheduled, notices arriving at random intervals. It feels less like procedure and more like she's toying with us, dragging it out to make us suffer. Every letter that arrives makes my chest tighten. And then came the one I dreaded most, the letter of the man. It was formal, precise, and merciless. Return all assets belonging to her inheritance, including the engagement ring my daughter-in-law wears. When my daughter-in-law read that part, her face drained of color. She looked at me with horror and her eyes, realizing that the rings she'd probably worn all these years, the symbol of her marriage, was stolen. She couldn't believe it. The truth hit her harder than anything else could have. She and my son exploded into the worst fight I've ever seen, screaming at each other in front of the kids. He tried to defend me, tried to explain, but it was useless. She grabbed the children and left the house, moving in with her sister that very night. Now my son is furious with me. He says none of this should have happened, that we should have never gone to her in the first place. He's angry that I dragged him into this mess, that I made him beg when all it did was open the door for his life to fall apart. He blames me for losing his wife, his children's stability, and the little bit of dignity he had left, and I can't argue with him anymore. For the first time, I don't know how to defend myself. Update 6. I thought things couldn't get worse, but I was wrong, dead wrong. This week, I learned the truth. My son does have a gambling problem, a massive one, and not just a few thousand owed here and there. He's buried in debt with the wrong people. I only found out when they came to our door. It was late evening when the knock came, heavy, deliberate, the kind of knock that makes your chest tighten. When I opened the door, 3 men were standing there to stay behind, silent and menacing. The one in front introduced himself as Daniel. His presence filled the space, calm but intimidating. He said he was here to collect what was owed. My son wouldn't even come out of his room. He knew I tried to bluff, told them to leave, threatened to call the police. That's when Daniel smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't cruel. It was calculated, cold. It reminded me instantly of Cura, my niece, when she came to our home. That same look of confidence that made me feel small. Then